Hello, good afternoon, America. Good afternoon, Oakley, Kansas, Palm Springs, where my guest Vince Taylor is today, and Vancouver, Canada,
Yes.
where Vince is from. Today's interview with Seeking Context is with author and entrepreneur Vince Taylor. And Vince has written a book called Beyond the Blindfold,
Nice.
Harnessing the Secret Power of Context. And so what better guest to start off my post 9/11 series of podcasts with more interviews than Vince, who's sort of written the book on a topic that is near and dear to our hearts about finding out context about other people's lives and other people's world experiences. So I'm really looking forward to finding out about writing a book and about your career and what you've learned over the many experiences you may have had. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Justin. I'm super excited. And yes, a shout out to Vancouver. You happen to find me in Palm Springs, but you can't see the flamingos on my shirt, but I'm trying to fit right in. But yeah, hometown Vancouver, a little cold and rainy, and I'm down here getting a little sunshine. So this is pretty awesome.
Well, welcome back to America. I heard you were just discussing the border is open.
Yes.
Mostly in 2 weeks, it'll be really open for people
Correct.
to
Yep.
drive back and forth.
Canadians can drive. The snowbirds can all come down here to Palm Springs, and yeah, a lot of Canadians find themselves in both Florida and California in the wintertime for sure.
Cool. So
Yeah.
tell me about your life today, Vince, if you can. Like, what is a day in the life of Vince Taylor in terms of like your professional life, I guess, to start with?
Just living the dream, Justin. Just living the dream. That's I as I'm aging, I hope somewhat gracefully. I've paused to ask myself the questions: what am I doing? What is my day to day? It turns out I think that I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I love the challenges of business. I love the opportunities to learn, and that sounds kind of cliche, but I found myself in a lot of different careers, and we can talk about a little of how that contextually fits with our conversation. Today, I find myself in a very strange part of the real estate world called pre-sale marketing and sales. It's not a big a deal, not as big a deal in the US anymore. It used to be. But in Canada, virtually every single condo you ever see is pre-sold. So we sell hopes and dreams and futures, and we sell things that don't exist. Well, that's crazy. Don't ever go into this business. It's crazy. But it's kind of the big challenge and the problems and the opportunities to meet really interesting people, talk to people like yourself and Caden here, to explore things that I never would get to do if I sort of stayed in my lane. So I've tried a lot of different businesses over my life, this one being particularly difficult, but I love it. And I got a great team, and a day in the life is just getting out there, reading a lot, writing a lot, learning a lot, trying to solve problems, and never ever feeling like you're fully confident that you know what the heck you're doing. And that's not a feeling for everybody, but it seems to work for me. So it really gives me an opportunity to meet a lot of interesting people, and I think that is the biggest draw.
Right. And so is your role sales? So there's somebody's building a project in the future and they need to lock in the planned purchases of those so that they can
Correct.
finance the building.
That's exactly right. And this idea was huge in the U.S. Believe me, it was a big deal. And most of the real estate around the world these days, without going down this path too far, boring your listeners to death, the idea is if you're going to build a giant $100 million tower, you better be right before you start building, because you can't undo it then. So we sell a portion of it that triggers the financing exactly as you suggest. In the U.S. markets, the sort of the plan has shifted a bit more to rental properties. People build towers and rent them out, but that wasn't always the case. Anyway, down the road, however far you want to go, a day in the life is our business cycle on a building might be 5 to 7 years. So a client phones me, says, I'm standing on the corner of Walk and Don't Walk in some city somewhere, and I want to buy this land. Should I buy it? What should I pay? And if I do buy it, what should we build? What's it going to sell for in 3 to 5 years? Take 3 more years to build it, and then you might get paid, Vince. Well, wait a minute. I'd like to get paid before 3 to 5 years, but that's the craziness of the business. So it's really interesting because you don't build a product and then sell it. You build it today to sell in what you think might be of interest in 3 to 5 years. So in our world, which is very fitting to what we're talking about today, I have to have or have developed a broad understanding of macroeconomics, microeconomics, behavioral economics, social economics, the behaviors of people, because what they tell me that they want today is not contextually important to what I have to sell them in 5 years. So I don't just have to understand what's happening now. I have to use my best guess. And that makes the problem ever so much more challenging and fun. So that's a kind of a typical day. And I often help out other small business people because it helps keep me sharp, keeps me to understand why people buy things. Why do you go to Walmart instead of Macy's? Why do you buy one color car over another one? There are reasons, and they're very hard to unlock. And so the more I can understand about different businesses and why you live in Kansas. I asked you that off the air. You could live anywhere in the world, but there was a reason. So try to unpack your particular situation. I find fascinating. And so that's what a typical day is for me.
Right. Have your other entrepreneurial pursuits been in the real estate world, or are they varied?
They're all over the map. I started in the television business. And again, I love this stuff, so I could talk to you forever. I started out in the TV business. I don't know how the heck I ended up in TV business, but I was in front of the camera, behind the camera, did that for a while, but it's a crazy business too. You get married and you have kids and it just doesn't work out. So then I was a real estate developer for many years. That took a bit of a left turn in 1999, which was a massive recession for anybody with enough gray hair like these to remember. That was tough. And then in the .com bubble, this is the craziest thing. I was one of the North American experts, if you can believe that word, and I'm using the word in air quotes, on vision-guided robotics for the automotive industry. Honestly, Justin, I had never seen a vision-guided robot in my whole life. And this beautiful piece of software came out and they said, we got all these engineers, we've got this great idea, but we don't know how to sell it. We can't articulate the value proposition to our customers. I thought, well, how hard could that be? Turns out very hard. But there I am, and a great example of that. I'm standing on the stage in the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and I've got, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. I'm raising $50 million for this company. Like literally months before, I had no idea about this. And I am now on stage facing the biggest financiers in North America to raise money for this startup company. And the television cameras go on and you're on and you better start talking. And I did the circuit of New York and Chicago and Detroit and DC and all around. And I did that I went there for 6 months, stayed for 6 glorious years. And we know how the .com thing ended. But what an experience. I mean, for a guy like me to meet so many people, to be challenged in so many ways, that was amazing. And so then I got back to Vancouver. The market was just picking up again in the early 2000s. And my whole business plan was basically falling backwards into a bathtub. So you don't have to have a business plan. And we thought, well, how hard could it be to start a brokerage agency? I know about real estate. The market needs somebody. I'm not afraid of a new challenge. And 17, 18 years later, here I am. And so they've all been disconnected in some ways, but connected in their complexity and fun, quite frankly.
Right. So not a straight line path between careers.
This arrow is broken and twisting and turning, and it's not always successful. Anyone who's honest, who's a business person, will tell you that you just try to win more than you lose. The best batters are hitting 300. And that's a fact. And if somebody tells you they're always successful and they know what they're doing, they're lying.
Right. Or at least you just.
So I've had my shares of ups and downs. Yeah, you just got to try stuff. And I say this kind of half tongue in cheek. People who are very entrepreneurial have to have this convergence of where arrogance and stupidity cross. Because if you weren't arrogant enough to believe that your mousetrap was going to be better than everybody else's mousetrap, you'd never try. And then you have to believe your own BS stupidly sometimes, because most of the time it's not true. But skyscrapers wouldn't get built. Tech firms wouldn't get consulting. All of us who start businesses statistically doomed to fail. We have to believe in ourselves to the point where that convergence is. And sometimes you're just wrong, but what a journey each time you try. And I respect people who drive buses and teach school and do other things that I'm not set up to do. And without them, we couldn't have a society. And without us crazy people, we couldn't get things done in other ways. So I love the whole aspect of it. But that delusion is what's driven me all these years.
Right. Do you feel like there was some delusion or naivete in like the decision to be like, okay, I'm going to write a book?
Oh boy. I'm going to give you the short version. So here's how it actually happened. And it's actually not a bad story. So I'll tell you the truth. Normally I'd make it up if it was more fun. It's hard for people to remember that the email and internet weren't around, 20 odd years ago. There was no such thing. If you and I wanted to have a conversation about something interesting, I'd have to drive to your house and have a beer. And you'd say, oh, my wife's bugging me. My boss is, this and that. What do you think, Vince? And I'd say we'd have a few beers and off we go. Or I could write you a letter and put a stamp on it. If you're sending a letter to your aunt for the, thank you for the birthday card, and she lives in, somewhere. But there was no way to really have a private conversation because there was only one telephone in the house and it was in the hall and your sister listened to your conversation. So
Right.
This wasn't a thing. So all of a sudden email came about and you could say, hey, Vince, what are you doing? Oh yeah, what I'm doing. And it's hit send. And so a bunch of us were sort of thinking we're all therapists now because we're asking each other these interesting questions. And one day, and literally one day, I was about to hit send and I thought, that's just a bad answer. And it was a serious question about somebody was having trouble with the wife, I believe. And what did I think about this and that? And I looked at my answer and I thought, where in the world did I come up with that BS? And I sat literally back in my chair like this and I thought, this is the Pandora's box. Where did I come up with any of my ideas? Was it my mother? Was it my teacher? Was it the guy who helped me fix my bike? Was it the church? Was it things I read? I mean, I'm almost 60 years old. If you wanted to learn about polar bears when we were young, not me being a bit older than you, I think, you had to ride your 3-speed bike to the library. And if there was a book on polar bears, whatever it said was true, right? Because that was it. So if it said polar bears were actually black and you thought they were white, then you told everybody they were black because there was no way to get information. So this convergence of email and internet allowed us to look things up and allowed us to have serious private conversations, but also shifted the obligation to do your homework and to question your contextual analysis of everything. If we grew up in a certain town in Kansas, and we, again, to be politically correct, we all kind of look the same, we're all kind of the same age, we all kind of went to the same church, we end up having these homogenous ideas because of our experiences, but that doesn't make them right. And I had some eureka moments where I went, oh my God, I am just spewing things. And so once the top of that box comes off, I went back into a very long and painful 10-year journey to question many of my most sacredly held beliefs. And boy, oh boy, I can tell you that it was no fun. I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to be a person who would no longer recite things that were false or incorrect. And that morphed into a book, and that gets into a whole other thing. You have imposter syndrome. Why would anyone, I'm just some guy from Vancouver who cares what I think. But it took a bunch of rethinking and how would the book be interesting. But really, it came from the recognition that some of the things that I thought were absolutely true were absolutely false. And it was an awful, terrible, horrible, enlightening, embarrassing, wonderful feeling.
Did you, in your research on how thoughts come about and how beliefs come about, was it reading philosophical works or talking to people? Like, how did you go about this 10-year research project, I guess?
It really started out answering questions on email. And then it went back to, okay, so somebody would say to you, I don't really like my job. I wonder how long people stay in an average job. If I work at the post office, do people keep the post office job their whole life? Sounds like a benign question. And you used to go, I don't know. Jerry, the postman's been working here. And then I thought, well, I wonder if that's true. And if somebody asked me a serious question, and I'm kind of a research guy, so I took my role seriously. I've been asked a serious question. And it deserves a serious answer. So then you go to the internet and it says the average postal worker has a career of 6.5 years, gets a bad ankle and a poor shoulder, and they're tired of throwing whatever, and think, or get bitten by a dog and quits. And you think, oh. And then you go down the rabbit hole. Where do post office workers work next? Well, they tend to work, in outdoor jobs as this or that because they're used to being. And you think, and so you go down these paths. And so you think, well, how long does the average worker in the United States stay at a job? So if my friend said, I've been here 8 years, I don't feel I'm ready for advancement, I can say, well, great news. The average tenure is 7 years. A lot of people feel just like you. This might be the time to make a sideways move because research indicates that's how you do this and take a step over there. I had no idea of this. Well, the rabbit holes then are, but what an interesting thing when you could actually type in, and if you care about things and you want to learn things, you want to be correct and accurate about polar bears or the life cycle of post office workers, now you could do it. So then I took 52, about 60 of my favorite topics, just random things of interest to me. And I challenged myself and did a lot of homework into this book. The idea is not to be heavy duty or you've read some, but I'll be interested in your comments. It was to be light, interesting, entertaining, and important. And it wasn't, the real turning point was it could never be Vince says that Justin and Caden should, because nobody wants to hear that. Not from your teacher, not from your mother. And it was Susan Boyce, who helped me with this. And she used to call me Vicar Vince. She'd say, every now and again, you're up in your damn pulpit and you're pointing your finger. She's, piss off. Sorry, I can say it on your podcast. Piss off. Don't say that. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, no. So we took about 5 years in. This was a longer answer to your question. I had to take all this material and turn it absolutely first person. This is 100% first person. This is the three of us here today sitting around a campfire having a few beers. And I tell you a story of what happened to me. Now, we know instinctively as friends and parents and people who are around, if you say this happened to me, everybody kind of leans in and says, oh, really, tell me more. Because, of course, it might have happened to you. But if I say, Justin, you should, boom, right? So I had to turn all of this writing into first person. Never, and I'm very proud of this, does it say you should even once in this whole book. This is a story about Vince walking down the yellow brick road, all the funny things that happened to me, the things, and some of it you might find interesting. And the original title was called, Did I Ever Tell You About the Time? And I got two boys, older now, 30 and 29, and sitting around the campfire with your kids saying, kids, boy, old grandpa. And they'd say, oh yeah, here we go. That's the way I wanted it to be, but I wanted it to be accurate, entertaining, and fun. And that's why it took so long, because you'd write chapter 17 because you believed it. Then you'd write chapter 22, which contradicted 17. You have to go back and rewrite it again. And then, so finally, 10 years later, you got 52 chapters.
Right. Well, how did you go about finding Susan Boyce? How does it work with a co-author? It seems like the voice of the book was you. She was a friend of yours?
Yeah, just a friend of mine. And she was, a kind of matter of fact old gal, as she'll probably hear this and say, you can't call me that, but she is an old gal. And she's a wonderful writer. And she kept me to task because she said, oh, just roll her eyes. I'd send her a piece that I thought was really cool. And she'd say, no, nobody cares like that. Put it back in your own first voice. And so we struggled back and forth because I didn't want her to take away my personal energy and style. And she was very good about that. Obviously, I write a lot of things, but I'm not a professional writer. So grammar, diction, I might get it right, I might get it wrong. So you had to fix that. But more importantly, what I asked her to do is keep me on task to keep it interesting and fun and never, 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 never preachy with this big finger. Never, never, never. So Susan was the reason that we really got this dialed in. And I hope it comes across the way we intended.
Right. Cool. Well, so one of the sort of themes that I noticed in the book is you talk a lot about the old Vince and the new Vince. And it's the point is that email where you looked at, you're like, I need to understand why I had the thoughts that I just conveyed to a person. But is there a defining line in your mind of a time for the old Vince and the new Vince? And can you tell me what the differences between those people are, or if it's a full evolution of Vinces over time?
Both are true. There's an absolute time. There is a stake in the ground. There's a eureka thunderbolt moment. I'm going to share this with you. And then, of course, the evolution happens because thunderbolts only kick you in the butt. They don't teach you how to figure it all out, which I don't have all figured out, but we're on the path. So I'm in South Africa. I'm in Johannesburg, circa 1984. Mandela's in jail. Apartheid is on, depending who you ask, contextually, a good time or a bad time to be there as a white guy, right? We're sitting at the dinner table, and this is a wonderful family that's taken me in, Afrikaans family, we would say a white family. And we're watching the 6 o'clock news. And over the last couple of days, there was a bunch of kids, black kids, that had walked up over an overpass and dropped rocks off the overpass onto car windshields and were killing people on the interstate. Terrible story, huh? You're watching this like you'd watch in any city. And so 3-4 days later, we're all sitting around and we're having some soup. And the police show up on the 6 o'clock news. The kids are up there and they took machine guns and slaughtered the children. Like slaughtered them on 6 o'clock news on TV, and nobody looked up from their soup. Like as if they were announcing the score of the high school football game and you casually, nobody looked up. And I'm from Vancouver and my eyes are just like this. And I'm thinking, I thought, okay, nobody's reacting. So I better be cool. So finally I asked the guy, the patriarch of the family, I said, what? And he looked at me and he said, we asked them not to do that. We warned them not to do that. Now they won't do that anymore. And he went back to eating his soup. And I thought, okay, everything I knew about right and wrong, left, right, good, bad was now upside down. I mean, these guys looked like me. They talked like me. They dressed like me. They invited me into their house. Day to day, it felt normal. And now what I had thought was correct about the way you handle these situations was completely upside down. And there was no reaction to it other than mine. So then what do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Is this different? And your world explodes very quickly. The next day, I go into like a Walgreens, and there's a guy standing there with a big smile on his face, and he's got a 9-foot-high rhinoceros whip. And of course, you got to ask, right? If you're a guy like me, you got to ask. I said, what's the whip for? And he says, well, this is to keep people from shoplifting because stealing is bad. It says so right in the Bible. Stealing's bad. And if I hit them with the whip, they don't steal, which is good. So I said, you hit the children with the whip? He said, yes. And then they don't steal, which is good. Stealing's bad. And I went, I'm going to go to CVS, I think, maybe. I'm going to go somewhere else. Right. Those are two thunderbolts literally within the week. And I thought, well, what else is it that I have been trained to believe about right and wrong morals? We talk a lot about morals and morality in the book, ethics. Where does this all come off the rails? Why is one person's contextual experience considered more valuable than another? And it's easy for listeners to say, yes, Vince, but I can hear it. I can hear you guys saying that. Stop. Why does your experience give you more validity than another person's experience within the goalposts of life? We're not talking about madness. But why is hitting someone with a whip necessarily bad if it stops the behavior we're trying to stop? And where's the cascading slide of all of your decision making and all of your awakening? And those were the eureka moments that started me. And it took me a while when I got home to kind of unpack. I mean, at 22 years old, what do I know? I never seen anything like this from Vancouver. And then this, I guess, distilled for another 10 years or so, and then I started to become very interested in the subject, and off it goes, right?
Yeah, you one of the topics of your book is morality, and I believe you define yourself, you didn't really define it, this is sort of paraphrasing, as that you're kind of an amoral person or have become that. And my interpretation of that was that you have a moral code of your own, but you sort of hold it in check when you judge, or you try not to judge other people's moral outlooks. I'm curious if you can expand on that.
You make it sound so much nicer than I was thinking. Amoral sounds weird and suspicious to me. Like, what kind of
Well, it has
creepy
a bad
process?
connotation, but
Well,
it's
it does, doesn't it? And so I use the word on purpose because, of course, you write it down and you look at it and you go, "Oh, that's weird." And then I thought, no, you know what? I spent a lot of time writing that piece and a lot of time thinking about that piece. So what it means simply to me is I don't judge a cat for killing a mouse because he's hungry. I don't judge a man, a woman for leaving her husband because I don't know the whole story. I don't judge necessarily a homeless person who could get a job or something like that. Without knowing their background and their history, without knowing everything about the situation, what place is it for me to be imposing what might be Christian morals, because that's where they seem to start? Because morality is not a natural thing. Nature has no morality. If somebody ventures into the crocodile's den and the crocodile eats them, nobody's outraged. But suddenly there's a certain age where you can marry a young girl, or you can't go into the bar till you're 21, and it's immoral to have a beer until you're 21 years old, but we can send you to war when you're 19 and see all the horrors of war, but it's immoral to have a beer because you might be corrupted. What? This whole thing is a mess. So morality for me, amoral, means I'm going to suspend my judgment, again, within the goalposts, not too crazy stuff.
Mhm.
What morality means to me is I will not willingly do something to better myself at the expense of someone else. I won't take candy from a baby. I won't steal a CD or a record from Walmart any more than I would download music, because to me, that's stealing. As a person
Mhm.
who writes things, if you steal my book online and don't pay for it, that's the same stealing as walking into a bookstore and putting it into your coat. But if you ask 20 people how they felt about that, they'd say, no, that's not actually a crime. You can't enrich yourself at the expense of others and look yourself in the eye and say, that's okay. You know, I'm not a religious guy per se, and some of your listeners may be, but I give great credit to the religions of the world for giving us the fabric to work together as a society. They said, here's 10 or 12 rules or commandments or however many, depending which religion you like. You can't do this. You really shouldn't do that. And you should do a lot more of this. Don't steal. Don't look at your neighbor's wife. Don't take his bike, and don't lie, and, do all. Those are big ideas. And if we go back to the big ideas, nobody said you can't not go to church on Sunday. That's not one of the big rules. Oh, it's immoral. You're sinful if you don't do this. Or if you like this kind of food. In the Catholic Church, you couldn't have fish on Friday. What? I'm pretty good at reading the Bible. It doesn't say anywhere, no fish on Friday, but somebody who didn't work in the fish market came up with this. And my mother actually told me it was immoral. It was a sin to eat fish. What? So I am amoral when it comes to ridiculous things, where it comes to suspending my judgment about other people's actions who deserve the right to be happy. You've been through some personal stuff. I've been through some personal stuff. You deserve the right to be happy, and no judgment should come from me. And I will never enrich myself at the detriment of others. And that's where I draw the line. And that's what makes me amoral.
Right. How do you, when you were raising your family, I'm sure you have thoughts on how to best sort of raise children to be good members of society. I guess what did you try to teach your children after
Right.
you sort of, or try to not stand in judgment of others, but yet would like, I assume you would like a certain type of behavior from children.
This is beautiful because this is right into the sharks. We said can't be boring. So you're throwing me right to the sharks. I love it. So, everybody has an idea about how to raise kids. So I have a lot of thoughts on it. And the ironic one that I like best is bedtime is the time when you're tired of dealing with your kid. It's not 6 o'clock. It's not 8 o'clock. It's not immoral to let your kids stay up all night. It's not unethical. It's when your parents are tired of being parents, you put your kids to bed, right? That's actually bedtime, because there's lots of cultures around the world who don't have bedtime. And one friend of mine said, well, we eat quite late. We're a sports family. You'd come in from hockey and lacrosse and baseball or whatever, and you have dinner at 10 or 11 at night. And they said, well, that's terrible parenting. You're a horrible person. We have dinner at 5 o'clock because 5 o'clock is dinner time. I'm like, what? You mean dinner time is when you get home and you're trying to make a burger because your kid's got to do homework because you got to get up in the morning, and you're just at baseball practice, and that's the only time they can have dinner. And if you teach somebody that situational ethics is really what it is, ethics and morality tend to suit you when it suits you, but not so other times, is so ridiculous.
Mhm.
So, I would say more so in the US, if dad was a Republican, sons were Republicans, Democrats, like ran in the family. Why? Maybe we didn't do a good job exposing our children to all facets of politics, to really learning the doctrine of the Democratic Party, to really suspending our beliefs about what we learned from our fathers so that our kids could make informed, valuable decisions. And if we didn't, then we didn't do our job as parents. So I tried my best, obviously, long way from perfect. You can ask my kids, they'll confirm it, to make sure that when they said, so-and-so Johnny said this is true and that's true, I'd say, well, let's talk about this. Why do I have to be home at 11 o'clock from a party? Right? Every teenager, no way, I'm not coming home at 11 o'clock.
Mhm.
What is it with 11 o'clock? So finally I thought, I don't know. I didn't like to come home at 11. All the fun stuff supposedly happens between 11 and 12, even though we know that's not true. But when you're 16 years old, you believe that to be true. So I thought, well, why? If 11 o'clock was my curfew, why is it automatically my son's curfew? So we had long discussions about what's curfew, why do they come from, what is the responsibility needed, negotiate some better things. And it turned out that that was a pretty good time, but everyone agreed on it, as opposed to, as Susan would say, me wagging my finger. So as a parent, as I started to understand these things as I got older, I tried to impart all sides of the story. And like every good parent, you lie to your kids about some stuff because it's just easier. But when they got a little older, I really wanted to expose them to international travel. I took my kids everywhere around the world, and they got to see cultures and ideas, and they got to talk to people that didn't agree with me and didn't agree with our culture and society. And I encouraged them to make their own decisions. And if I get nothing more out of the experience of writing this book than hopefully raising children who are contextually very broad and open-minded, then it was worth every one of the billion hours it took to write this book.
Would you say you've learned things from your children?
I hate to admit it because they might be listening, but of course, yes. Little buggers. But because they're open-minded, now they challenge me. When I say things, Dad doesn't always know best. Dad's going to go do some homework if they challenge me. And they know I would say this, if they are listening, if they're going to say something to me that's important, it better be right. Don't come to me because they know I'm very detail oriented, very research oriented, very this and that. If you're going to tell me that the earth is flat, okay, but you better have a backup for it. So don't tell me that you're going to go to this party and you're going to go to see Mary Jane and you're going to be home at 11 o'clock without a reason, because I'm going to say, why? Your curfew's 10:30. So they learned how to research. They learned how to do background. They learned how to make convincing arguments. And critically, and we can talk about this a little bit more at the end, like the song says, you got to know when to fold them. You can't hang on to flawed arguments. And I don't want to take the thunder out of the end of this, but if I've learned one absolute thing is you can't, once you know something is no longer true, you have to let it go. And that just rips out your guts. But it is the most useful thing you can ever learn, because we hang on to things too long. They cause problems with our families and at work and everywhere else. And once you're wrong, let it go. Let your ego down. And that's what my kids teach me, is then I thought something was true and they call me on it. Now I have to go along with it because that's how I raised them.
Right. One of the chapters in your book related to morality, but it's empathy. And it's empathy is mankind's greatest gift,
Yes.
I think. You have, I
Yes.
think, sort of you're not sure
Yeah.
in the title of that. Can you tell me about that chapter or about your views on
Yeah.
empathy? And specifically, the one thing I read that I thought was interesting is when you were young, you thought that empathy was a sign of weakness.
I did. I did.
Um,
Uh, you know, you're walking down the street, any town, and there's a homeless person on and with their hand out. You're 20 years old, and your tendency is, if you're kind of a business type, maybe I'm strutting down, get a job. I work every day. I work 2 jobs. You should get a job. Piss off. I'm not giving you any money.
mhm,
Then you get to be about 35, you got a couple kids of your own, and you're going, this guy's in a pretty tough situation, but there's some morality here because I, go to church on Sunday. Well, don't you spend this money on alcohol, right? Because alcohol is bad. It says right in the book over there. You can't do that. And then you get to be about 55 or 60, and you think, okay, hang on. It's pouring rain. I'm somewhere in Kansas City. It's miserable. It's February, and this poor man or woman is on the street and they're not doing good. And but for the grace of God, and now we actually understand what that means as we get older, that could
mhm.
be any of us. A couple of decisions either way, a couple of bad luck, a bit of injury, a bit of sickness, bit of mental health, and that's me. And how would I feel if I was cold and tired and hungry? I just want some money so I can do something to make myself feel better. If it's booze, if it's drugs, if it's shelter, if it's bad decisions, who am I to suspend or to pass judgment on this poor soul? But I also did a deep dive into empathy versus sympathy, and I think if you read that chapter, it's really interesting. When you're confronted with somebody, for example, a very difficult situation, that you meet somebody who's lost a child, the child has been killed. You can say, I am sympathetic because I've never had children and I don't really understand how you feel. Or you can say there's a certain kind of empathy where you say, I understand because I have children and I can't imagine really how you feel. And then the third kind of empathy is, I really understand. I have children. I lost a child of my own and I really understand how you're feeling. Those are very different ranges of emotions. And we kind of understand the first one. We say, we're sorry for your loss. And the people look at you and go, well, you don't even understand what you're saying. And that's why it's so difficult at a funeral to say something meaningful, because unless you've lost one. So when you look at support groups, empathy support groups, they're generally people who have gone through a shared experience. Anyone who's never tasted alcohol is not going to be of much use at an AA meeting, because you can't feel into, which is the origin of the word empathy. It's a German word. You can't feel into someone else's pain and suffering unless you walk a mile in their contextual moccasins. And then that frees you to say their problem, and this is a big, long topic I'm very passionate about, their problem is my problem. That homeless guy on the street is my problem. Somehow or other through the universe, we are connected. And when I walk past him or her, that is a disservice both to them and to myself. But I didn't believe it. I didn't understand it. And even if you don't care about empathy, like even if you just prefer sarcasm, you're paying for that person one way or the other. You're paying for their medical expenses. You're paying for this. The best thing we can do is to help each other. And I'm no airy fairy, help each other, green unicorns. I'm not that guy at all, but I've sure moved from a long way over here to go get a job to whatever it takes, brother, I'm here for you, because we are all connected in this world, and I could be sitting in your shoes. But I did not believe that as a young man. I thought it was weak to do that. I thought everybody should look after themselves, and I was wrong and naive, and I've had to let go of that flawed argument, and I'm really proud that I did.
Do you think your original views on it were part of the culture of where you grew up, or is it a culture of an age demographic?
Both. I think it depends where you grew up entirely. Um, your Christian views, your Buddhist views are very different. Your Hindu views are different. Your there's views around the world, a lot of them based in religion, where a lot more are interested in helping. It's just a helpful kind of a thing. Not that I was not raised to be helpful. Of course, you help the old lady across the street, and then you steal your brother's candy or whatever. But we weren't. I don't think we were raised to not look out for ourselves first, family first kind of thing, right? Not neighbors and community first.
Mhm.
First Nations people seem to be much more spiritual in that way. It takes a village, it takes a community. We all got to look after each other. We tended to be, where I grew up, we tended to be more homogenous in that way. Yeah, you gave to the poor on Sunday and you did that, but we didn't make it our commitment. So I think it was partly demographic, and I don't blame anyone for this because mother, father, Uncle Johnny, and Sally and what were raised by the same people in the same community. We talk about how many generations people live in these towns, and we tend to pass on these same ideas, and they get ingrained in our children. And
Mhm.
I tried to break that with myself, because if I couldn't break it myself, then I couldn't honestly break it with anybody else. So partly age and partly community, partly circumstance.
Right. Um, I'm curious also about the title of your book.
Yeah.
So you've got empathy and we've got morality, and then it's Beyond the Blindfold. So what do you feel like was your blindfold,
Well,
or is a common person's blindfold?
the super fast story, as you're seeing a theme in this, is I had about 10 people reading with me. And if a chapter really sucked, then it never made it into the book. So I did this Googling on how do you name a book, right? I've never written a book. I don't know how to do it. So you get a bunch of names, and I'm an advertising guy, so I kind of know what I'm doing, and I do all this. So I send out 10 names to my 10 groups, and I'm thinking, whichever one comes back is going to be the title of the book, right? Sounds like great. Each title got one vote. I thought, okay, well, that didn't work. It's supposed to work and it didn't work. Now what do you do? So for me, it was an awakening. It was a removal of both my physical and emotional blindfold. It was the opening of my heart and my soul and my eyes and everything at the same time. So of course, you go down the gamut of zombies and people walking towards a light, and it got very religious and weird, and that was not what I wanted. I wasn't going to the pearly gates, but honestly, this material became so powerful to me that I couldn't not share it. You wonder why people write books. You don't do it to make any money, I can tell you that. You do it because you come across an idea that becomes so powerful to you that you can't not share. And so I'm wrestling with imposter syndrome, right? Who's Vince? Why would Justin and Caden care about what Vince has to say? And yet here we are. So I thought that day in Africa, I kind of removed the blindfold from my eyes, and I woke up to the realization that just because I believe something to be true, even with all of my heart, does not make it true. And the exploration and the seeking of the truth sounds esoteric and philosophical, but I live it day to day to day, every day now. And that's where the title came from.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
And then you went off and you published it, and now people are reading it.
Yeah.
How is the reception? What is it like to have now published a book? What is that like?
It's interesting because I've written a lot of things. The first time you hear the radio commercial you write on the radio, come down to Jim's Ford dealer and buy a car. Hey, that's kind of cool. I wrote that, and so now I've done tens of thousands of these. So I've had a little experience, but there's no feeling I've ever had when I hit send on this, because part of the journey of this book was to be more honest than I wanted to be, if I'm being honest about honesty. And there's a chapter about honesty. I encourage you to read that. We're not that honest, even with each other and ourselves. So I thought this material wasn't working if I wasn't going to be honest with my readers. And it was a terrifying moment to hit send to the publisher, because you can't take it back. And, in our world, they say, I think it was Bezos who said, brand is what people say your product is about when you're not in the room. You can tell me you got the greatest service and the best, and you're a business guy, and you're going to say in your ad, Justin's consulting firm is the best, and people behind might say, yeah, no, it's not, or yes, it is. We can't control what people think of us. And somebody once said to me, what other people think of you is none of your business. And I thought, I'm going to take that to heart. You know what? Screw it. If it's none of my business, then I'm going to do the best I can. I'm never going to enrich myself at your detriment. And I'm going to put this book out here, and some people are going to like it, I hope. And some people are not. But I have to be okay with that, because what people think of me is not my business. And my brand is what people are going to say when I'm not in the room. And I've done my best, and I've lived it. And it's really cool, but it's not easy. It's not easy. People say to you, oh, you wrote a book. You think, oh, I'm all that in a bag of chips because I wrote a book. Then you find out 10,000 new books get written a day. You think, oh, lots of people write about it. But it's really cool when you hit and to see it on the bookshelf for the first time, to go to Chapters, Indigo Chapters, Barnes and Noble, all that, and to see it on the bookshelf was a really rewarding experience. But honestly, the real reward has been having conversations with people like you, listeners. I love when people call me. I do these kind of podcasts on real estate and book all the time. And I like when people call me, and we'll touch on this at the end, and they say, I don't agree with you. I want to talk to you about this or that, or I'm thinking of getting into the real estate market. I want to phone these people back. Like, I live for this stuff because that was the avenue of being able to share what I felt so passionately about.
Right. I have this experience when I send an email, then I finally go back and read it. You can't send it and not read it. And you're like, oh God. Does that happen when you press send to your editor? You go back and you're like, or do you need to put it away and be like, well, it's out there. It's fine.
Both are true. There's 80,000 words in there. And especially what kind of dummy, me, obviously, would write 52 books? Because that's really what this is. I'm a real estate guy. I know about beer. Those are three things I could write a book on. A good book or bad book. I could talk to you about beer for 80,000 words. I wrote 52 individual chapters on 52 complicated topics. Each one of these essentially could be a book. I bit off way more than I could chew, but that's how it evolved. And now what are you going to do? So it was both a relief and terrifying to hit send, because now I have to stop writing. Like, there's parts of this that I'm sure 5 years from now, I'm going to say, what was I thinking? But the book is about evolution and context, not hanging on to flawed arguments. So because I believed it, I don't have to believe it today, because I've committed to change. So I was terribly relieved to also stop writing this damn book and send it and publish it. And then it is what it is. Right.
Right. And is there part two? Is there part two in the works?
I will. God, I'm not one to talk about myself too much, but there's been lots of requests for it. Yes. Which is really humbling. I don't know if I have how many summers I got left in my life, how much runway. I wouldn't take me 10 years again, but there's hundreds of thousands of hours in that book. Yeah. You take some of the more complicated chapters. It took me months to do the homework and the research. So hopefully you wouldn't have to. So you could say, oh, that's cool. I never thought of that before. That took me months to tell you these little things. Could I do another 52 chapters? I don't know. But the authors, the people who do this for a living, tell me that you're not a real author unless you're working on another book. Well, at the moment, I'm not a real author then. I got a real estate company to run and kids to raise, and I've got Palm Springs with my wife, and I'd love to, but I don't know yet.
Right. Sounds like your mind might be churning on it.
It's churning. And it's the feedback when people phone me that really like it and say, wow, I keep this book beside my bed. I refer to it, because it depends when you read a book like this. If you're 20, 30, 40, 50, you're going to read contextually these lessons from the old gray-haired guy very differently. There's a story about free stuff. Anyone that's our age knows that free stuff is just bad, because the plumber who does you a favor never comes back to fix the thing that he said because you got a deal. I don't want any deals. Thank you. I'd like to pay full price, and I'd like to get what I did. Charge me correctly. But a 20-year-old, you think, oh, no, this is great. So when you read my chapter on free stuff as a young person, you think that old guy's crazy. And the old people are going, yeah. That's what I always told my kids, and they didn't listen. So the joy to me is, if somebody will take this is my dream, that you guys take this book and you have it in your gym bag, you have it beside your bed, you have it in your car, and you got confronted with some problem. You think there's something there that Vince guy, and you flip open and there's coffee stains and dirt and sand because you had it at the beach. Oh, you know what? That kind of thinking could really help this particular problem. This is not meant to be a book that's, in my dream, read and put away. This is a living thing, because this is how I live my life. It's about me. It's not about you. But if you want to peer into how I solve something, I would be just thrilled if that's how people use this book.
Right. Yeah. That would be very satisfying.
It would be. And,
well, so if you could summarize the cliff notes, maybe your learnings, like how can of writing the book and then the content of the book, Like,
Yeah.
how would you say a person can harness the secret power of context?
How much time do I have? Because I want to give you a couple good examples.
We got well, we'll be about an hour and 10 minutes, but that's not a hard stop. So,
Okay.
um,
So let me give you a couple because I think this helps. So here, this is what I actually do every day. This is my actual process. So you're at a party, right? You've got your kids are having a play date, and you're over to a kid's birthday party, 12-year-old's birthday party. You and three other, I'll just use myself an example, three other mothers are over by the punch bowl, and there's, some guy standing there, and we're talking about homework, right? Oh, homework's good. Homework's great. I help my kids with my homework. Homework's good for everybody. And we all agree that homework is a good thing, right? Benign subject. The guy sitting over by the punch bowl says, I think homework is terrible. It's a differentiator between kids that have and have not. And I think it's irresponsible of the teachers and the school system to ever send kids home with homework. Three mothers and I turn our heads and we're like, oh, okay. So here's the process. And this is the easy example. And I'm going to give you a hard one. Okay. So here's what I do. My first reaction is nothing, because your automatic reaction is, right? What are you talking about? We all agree. You must be wrong. So now today, my reaction is blank. I don't react. So nobody can read. My second reaction is I don't ask the person about what they said. I ask them about themselves. Oh, gee, Justin, that's an interesting perspective. Tell me a little bit more about your background. And then you would say, I hope you wouldn't say, but you would say, well, about 2 years ago, my wife passed. She had cancer. I've got three kids, 12, 8, and 6. I'm working 2 jobs trying to get them in hockey and ballet. I don't have the financial resources, the mental resources, or the emotional ability to do homework with my children when I get home. My children are falling further behind. They're in school for 8 hours a day. And I don't think it's fair that the teachers don't handle this problem at home or at school and foist it on to unsuspecting parents because it's causing a gap, all because my wife died of cancer. Now the three mothers and myself, eyes wide open again, are going, oh, I know about homework. My kids did homework. I believed in homework. I've always understood homework. Never a day in my life will I forget this conversation. Will I ever view homework in the same context again? Because he just spun the tables on me. But I needed to know who I was talking to. So then I might say, tell me a bit more about your wife. And then the fourth step is, do I want to continue this conversation or not? Do I want to walk away, or do I want to regale that person with my views and say, you're wrong. It's not my problem that your wife died. Is this a conversation I want to have, or do I want to get another bowl of punch and hit the kitchen? So I got these 4 steps. Now, what happens if you get into a more complicated situation where you have a really big problem? For us up here, we just had a big mess with residential schools. We had a lot of children that had gone to residential schools that were taught by members of the church that were, allegedly abused. We just found hundreds of unmarked graves. It just made the news all over the world. I don't know if it made it to Kansas, but it was a big deal here. Mm-hmm. So everybody's blood is boiling right now about these, using radar to find 700 children who were, died of spurious causes. So then you're at the same party, you go around the corner and there's somebody else standing by the punch bowl. And that person says to you, okay, we're talking about residential schools. And he says, I think residential schools are a good thing. I think they did a lot more good than harm. And I think what the media has done is distorted the view. Now, of course, you can feel your reaction, right? You can feel your blood coming up. So we got 4 steps to deal with this. First is nothing, right? Nothing. My second thing I would do is I would say, okay, tell me a little bit more about yourself. Not what you said, but about yourself. He would say, okay, my grandfather, my father, and my uncle were all principals of residential schools. I grew up in residential schools. I knew the kids. We played on the playground. I've heard all the stories. I know all about it. And I'm telling you, this is what happened. Okay, now step 3, I'm going to ask him a little bit more and he's going to flesh this out. And then I'm going to get to the very difficult step 4. It would be easy to argue with this person. But right now I am outgunned. I am arguing with an expert. He knows more about, I've never even seen a residential school. I've never been in one. I've never met a survivor. I've never met anything. Now you can apply this logic to any of your life's difficult problems. So here's what I do now. I say, you know what? If you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask you if I could take your name and number. I'm going to do some homework, and I'd like to circle back and have this conversation with you. But I haven't earned the right to an opinion just yet. I haven't earned the right to an opinion. I don't know the material from your point of view. All I've got is the media to rely on. And that, as I've learned as a young man back in the day, is unreliable. I'm going to walk away from this argument. And the old me, the old Vince, would have been attacking and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. And only to find out later that dad, uncle, whatever, we're actually principals in these schools. They've written books and documented, and they know all about this stuff. And I know nothing. And here is me shooting my mouth off. It is soul and ego destroying to walk away and not pick a fight. In the old days, the bully used to take your lunch money sometimes, right? You're confronted on the street and you had to give up your lunch money because you weren't emotionally and physically strong enough to deal with this. If you're going to have a fight after school, down by the monkey bars, as my friend Craig used to say, I don't know if there are monkey bars anymore. If you're going to fight that bully, you got to be ready. And if that person is wrong about what they said about those schools or wrong about what they said about homework, go home, do your own research, earn the right to an opinion, then go back and sit down quietly and have a conversation once you know your audience. I use these techniques every single day. And as a result, probably the most important thing that I can impart to people is I invite criticism. And that sounds crazy. You're a businessman. You don't want to be criticized. There's two reasons people criticize you. They're crazy, which then we don't care, right? The guy says the earth's flat. You're wrong for thinking the earth's round. And you're thinking, I'm pretty sure we've solved that mystery. You're just nuts. Get out of here. But what if somebody's really mad at you about something? I used to be defensive. Now I'm like, this is awesome, because nobody gets mad about nothing. So what could I have done to cause this problem? What can I learn from? What flawed argument did I share that caused them to be so emotional that I can fix for myself and forever be a better person? So if you can't offend me, and I welcome criticism, even if it's crazy criticism, because I can get rid of that. When people criticize me, it only can make me better. So why would I be offended? Ever? You can't make me mad anymore, virtually. You can't make me unhappy. You can't do anything to me, because my contextual shield that says I'm hanging on to a flawed argument, you've pointed it out. Thank you, Justin. Not, piss off, Justin. Thank you, Justin, for pointing out something that I never understood before. So it's the greatest gift that I accidentally got from writing this book, and I can share with people, is once that moment becomes where you embrace the fact that we don't hang on to flawed arguments, that we know our audience is, that we have to earn a right to an opinion, that you can no longer be offended. It's just like this weight off your shoulders. And I live it technically and practically every single day. And if I could share anything at all, it would be that lesson.
I was thinking maybe you could consult with Twitter to add a tell me more about your personal context button.
Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great? I mean, it's going to happen to you today after we had this conversation. Somebody will be mad at you about something. Somebody's going to phone you, Justin, you didn't do this, that. And you're going to say, that's fantastic. I'm really happy that you're upset. And they're going to, what? Nobody ever says that. What do you mean, Justin? What kind of stupid thing? No, because you're upset gives me an opportunity to learn and serve you better, which is why you pay me. So this is a fantastic opportunity. So let's sit down and air your grievances and sort it out, because you're going to get better service from me, and I'm going to charge you more money next time. And the whole conversation flips right upside down from this confrontation to a welcome dialogue, because he's going to say, well, where I come from, which is contextual background, that's not the way we used to do it. Well, tell me about where you come from. I had no idea, right? And all of a sudden, you're having a friendly conversation. He's telling you about his childhood and his crazy mother and his Aunt Brenda and all this stuff. And he thought that what you did for a living as a consultant should have been this because of where he grew up and his age and all the rest. And you're saying, but I didn't. I lived over there on the other side of the tracks. And this, now I understand the difference. How can we work together to make this better? Zero confrontation, zero hurt feelings. It sounds too good to be true, but honestly, if you follow those 4 steps, just turn off your emotion. And when you're wrong and you got to be ego pushed aside to just walk away, do your homework, and come back and sit down with your bitterest enemies and work it out.
It sounds like it's because you're curious to actually understand why they hold a different view.
Exactly right. And what a wonderful observation that I came across accidentally, because I wasn't that guy. I was the guy that said, get a job. I'm right. Polar bears are white. Says so right in the public library in Vancouver. Then you go to somewhere and they're not white because their skin's black underneath. Well, who ever thought polar bears had black skin? I didn't know that. But if you told me that, I would have said, you're crazy. But they do. Oh, that's where the black swan, you read books like that where this can't be. Oh, there's the black swan. Everything you ever thought, boom, gone, right? So
Right.
why not welcome these moments instead of fight about it? Why not have arguments with our friends, loved ones, children, families, coworkers? Why wouldn't we just, when they get hot, just engage and put a smile on your face and say, let's talk about this. Tell me more. Why in God's name are you mad at me? Because this is going to be fun, right? There must be a reason. I must have done something. And if it's a flat earth guy and he's just crazy, how fun is that, right? The world's not flat. We know that, but some people actually believe it is. So how upset can I get fighting with that person? I'm not. Right? I don't have the time and emotional energy for it. And everything else, I honestly, seriously embrace. I don't want to beat that to death. But that's the takeaway here.
And if people want to read and find out more than just the Cliff Notes, I think you have a website, right? Or they can buy it on Amazon.
I do. Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it anywhere, beyondtheblindfold.com. I'm easy to find. Please send me a note. Please, please, please tell me I'm crazy. Tell me I'm wrong. I'd love to hear it. Tell me I'm right. That's fun too. Tell me your thoughts and ideas. Give me ideas for future chapters. This is how we contextually solve problems. I love big problems, and we contextually can do it better if we understand each other. Maybe the rhinoceros whip was a bit of a thing, but it was an eye opener, right?
Right.
Stealing's bad. Don't steal. Oh, okay. So I've had problems with my boss, and I say, well, maybe you should ask him why he felt like that. You have to stay at 3:00 till after 3:00 today. Why? Oh, because I got in trouble from the boss above because I did something wrong. So I'm just pushing this on you, even though you don't deserve it. Okay, so would it make your situation better upstairs if I stayed till 4:00? So it made it look like you were being harder on me, but then you owe me one next Friday. Okay, that's fair, right? Instead of getting on the phone saying, that son of a bitch made me stay till 3. My first question is, okay, come on, what's going on in your life, right? What happened to you? Okay, they come clean. And then if we work together and I make him look good, and now the confrontation's dead, right?
Right.
So please, please, please write me with your thoughts and ideas, good, bad. Otherwise, I welcome them all. Beyondtheblindfold.com. Please, if you feel like it, pick up a book. This has been just a wonderful experience to be able to talk to you and your listeners. I hope they enjoy it. Hopefully they enjoy it.
Yeah. And I learned a lot of context on why you wrote a book and how we finally sort of found each other. And so it's really a pleasure talking with you. Congratulations on writing and publishing a book. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you.
It sounds like a hard road. I don't know that that's something I want to do myself, but I like reading good books, and this is a great one. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. And thank you, Caden, behind the scenes there too.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.